Welcome to your in-depth monthly astrology overview and zodiac forecast for March 2025. I'm going to give you some key details to look out for, then on screen share the event chart right at the start of March. That provides a backdrop for the whole month. Then as influences feed in, I'll go through each of those frame by frame to give you a crystal clear picture of what we can all collectively expect. I'm then going to go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces to give you a flavour of what's in store for them too. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. Thank you so much for joining me. It's great to have your company. If you're new here, if you have any comments, please do share them. This is very much a community. If you've yet to subscribe to the channel, please help it thrive by doing so now. But also, please also click the bell notification symbol. If you're already a regular visitor, your support and interactions are truly appreciated. My new website is live. It is developing at pace. Grab yourself a free natal birth chart. It's the best free natal birth chart you will see by visiting patrickarundellastrology.com. You can also get my absolutely brilliant 3-card tarot readings, each tense uniquely written for the past, present and future, which gives them a much greater accuracy. So this month, of course, sees the last of the series of solar eclipses in the sign of Aries that has gone between Aries and Libra. Well, that comes at the end of the month. And as we go into this new month, it's actually a shimmering connection between Mercury and Neptune, which can create perhaps the opportunity to elevate our thinking. But our thinking and our relating are going to come under the astral microscope this month, because although Mercury and Venus are in a fine conjunction, they're also both retrograding. And of course that can see things change that may have been in process. And of course Venus is in detriment in the sign of Aries. So as Mercury joins up with Venus on the 3rd, Mercury initially provides perhaps the ability to initiate and cut through the fog of that combination of Mercury and Neptune early on. But we do have on the 14th a lunar eclipse in the sign of Virgo. But what makes this so very powerful is that on the other side of the heavens, right beside the sun, is Saturn. So Saturn and the sun are coming into a very powerful conjunction, and that is going to be something that could be very testing on that lunar eclipse. So I will unpack that for you. Now the 15th does see Mercury go retrograde, but we have perhaps the most important event of the whole year on the 20th. It's the vernal equinox. It's the start of the astrological year, which in tropical astrology is based on the seasons. So the next 13-week period from the 20th is going to be hugely dynamic, potentially very exciting, not just because we have that solar eclipse in Aries, but also, of course, because Neptune is moving into Aries at the end of the month too. Now, it's the first visit to Aries for about 163 years, so it's a huge event. But we also have, with the retrograde to Mercury and also Venus, both of them return into the sign of Pisces by the end of the month. So for some relationships, it could be a case of 1 step forwards and 2 steps back. But that solar eclipse, which occurs on the 29th, it's broadly in a sextile with Pluto. In fact, the Sun and Pluto on the 23rd of this month are in an exact sextile, which is very, very exciting. That could be hugely transformational in a very constructive way. But as the month comes to a close and Mercury inverts back into Pisces and Neptune steps forwards, we really could see somewhat what we had at the start of the month, which is some kind of disorientation or confusion. Things may not be as clear as we would like. So on the screen now, I'm showing the event chart right at the start of the month. As ever, we need to be mindful of the two luminaries. And you can see, because of the new moon, which occurred at the end of last month, that energy is still cascading into March. So the energy of Pisces is very much about tuning into the traditional ruler, Jupiter, which is about faith. It's about our philosophies. It can be about hope. Neptune, the modern ruler, because it's so intrinsically threaded into this start of the month, you can see we have Mercury, Neptune and the North Node all together. We may in some ways be experiencing some uncertainties, but also some information that's been withheld could be leaking into the open, and that's going to be really interesting. So as we come into this month, we're still surfing that new moon energy, but it was a new moon that squared to Jupiter, the traditional ruler of Pisces, in the chatty Gemini. So don't be surprised if there's still a lot of claims and counterclaims as we come into this new month. But what about the position of Venus and Jupiter? Because these are the two planets of fortune. And it's true that Jupiter isn't at its best in Gemini, and neither is Venus in Aries, but they're still aligning almost perfectly through the first week of this new month. So that's exciting too. So as we come into the month, Mars, which had of course been going retrograde until the 24th of February, that's actually still in a pretty good link to the position of Saturn, suggesting that there could be some possibilities of something more stable starting to shape up. So back to the start of the month in detail. So the first 2 days we've got that combination between Neptune and Mercury, but also the North Node. And because the North Node only visits every 18.7 years through its entire circuit, but every 17 years to each sign, it's a long time since we had the North Node and Neptune together, around about 2012. So this has given us an opportunity to reach into some kind of higher purpose in a spiritual way. But of course what Neptune can also do is create an uncertainty. It's hard to get substance when Neptune applies to situations. And of course Mercury is the planet of thinking. So our thinking may lack a degree of clarity. Also Mercury, of course, in the sign of Pisces is in detriment. So it just depends on where you are in your personal situation. If you're doing something that you're truly passionate about, and it's anything to do with the arts, photography, healing, psychic work, you could be absolutely inspired as you come into this new month. But if you're someone who's much more rooted in the practical side of life, the fact that on the 2nd Venus goes retrograde, that does suggest, and that's going to go on through to the 13th of April and through to zodiac signs, that does suggest that a relationship matter could be far from clear. So we could expect some foggy conditions. Now, the arrival of Mercury initially in Aries on the 3rd, I think, is a good thing, because that can initiate, if it shrugs off the energy of Neptune, which it will do after about 2 or 3 days, some extra clarity can start to develop. But it's undeniable that that link between Venus and Jupiter can be fortunate. So again, if you're pursuing something that does really give you that spark into enthusiasm, very Aries energy, then the combination of Venus and Jupiter could see conversations and interactions which can speed up the process, as I say, initially. Indeed, as Mercury moves forwards, it's going to join in, and across weeks 2 and 3, but exact on the 11th, Mercury is conjunct Venus as well. Now, that's interesting, because Venus can be about relationships, can be about charm, can be about the foods we enjoy eating, but of course it can be about money and our values. But as Mercury applies to Venus, that does give us on the 11th some kind of opportunity, an added opportunity. But it all depends if you're doing something that really does give you that sense of of fulfillment. If there is a relationship, for example, that you're unsure of, then I think the combination of Mercury and Venus encourages in some ways to have frank discussions. But that brings us to the heart of the month, because we do have in week 2 the Sun and Saturn very close together, and the cazimi itself occurs on the 12th, so that's coming right on the heels of that Venus Mercury conjunction. And what the Sun applying to Saturn is going to really make us much more mindful of is the outcome of a lot of the discussions that have been washing around for some while. But the 14th sees the lunar eclipse. Now I feel that the nodal axis, which is closely aligned to the eclipse series, is making us aware of the need to balance the psychological, empathetic, spiritual side of our lives with the more practical dimension. But if we're feeling that our practical situation is in some ways disrupted by a lack of peace of mind, I certainly think we're all going to be collectively aware of it at the heart of the month. And that lunar eclipse, of course, is going to provide a backdrop for the next 6 months. Now, in terms of our personal situations, I think it's a great opportunity to think about ailments. Now, that's not to say that every ailment has a psychosomatic root. That's a kind of Louise Hay concept. And I feel that Louise Hay's brilliant, and it's often a very insightful way of looking at situations. But sometimes things are just more organically out of shape. But that's not to say that we don't have an opportunity to do practical things better. So the sign of Virgo is very much about virtue. The ruler Mercury is about teasing out the information in an analytical way which could improve our situation. So if you're down on power, you feel lacking in spirit, you're not feeling very hopeful, do think about the things that can be changed in terms of exercise, diet, nutrition, analysing much more carefully all of those elements and trying to make some improvements. But if there is any kind of major health outbreak in the world, it could follow on in a more amplified way from that time onwards, sadly. And I did predict this with the lunar returns, and it is because of Saturn, because remember, Saturn brings consequences, and it can be very strict, very exacting and demanding. Now, the other side of it is we have seen a lot of people sharing their stories, and that has become, particularly from celebrities, quite a big thing, particularly when their life stories haven't always been easy. But I feel that if there has been an appetite that's been rather sated for those kind of revelations, that also can come under the astral microscope at that time. It's going to be more pushback. Unfortunately, I think we could see a much stronger and perhaps more challenging governmental line from lots of different governments about social security. I feel that that lunar eclipse could see a lot more demands to understand why people make claims, and there could be implications for that, particularly for things like health insurance. But on the 15th, with Mercury inverting through to April the 7th, initially in Aries, something that seems so full of hope, those first weeks, the first couple of weeks of the month, are really coming under much greater scrutiny too. So it may again feel that something that we really felt excited about may have some flaws that come up. But the 20th, I love the eclipse and solstices, because really the quadrants are what are the basis of Western tropical astrology. So the 20th is the start of the new year, and it gives us all hope that things can be different. And the 27th, however, sees Venus in Aries then make its way back into Pisces. Now, the upside of that is that Venus is exalted in Pisces. She loves being there, and she is going to get in contact with the North Node. If there is something around a relationship situation, and remember that old saying, the course of true love is never smooth, well, maybe that's an opportunity to really think carefully and look out for some healing around something that hasn't been going as well as one would like. But the 29th, that last solar eclipse in Aries, that's a storming energy for the following 6 months. If you're someone who's very invested in doing your own thing, you're very entrepreneurial, or you want to take a firmer grip on your life direction, it's a time for new beginnings. But it's also a time to incentivize or energize ongoing strands that are actually very good. So I think that's something to really look forward to. But the 30th sees Mercury switching back into Pisces too, and of course Neptune then steps forwards into the sign of Aries. So that first part of Aries and that latter part of Pisces, so if we think the last decan of the sign of Pisces is ruled by Jupiter, and the first decan of Aries is ruled by Mars, along with the rulership of the sign, we are looking for some kind of transition that brings hope, but perhaps if it's rushed, it doesn't get properly constructed, there may be some rethinking. So expect, certainly in terms of peace talks, there to be quite a lot of to-in and throw-in. I don't feel it's going to be a straight line at all when it comes to the Ukraine or the Palestine situation. However, in our own personal worlds, we're welcoming in 2 eclipses this month. One's asking us to take care of our welfare and be conscious that it's okay to feel the emotional, spiritual and psychological part of life, but at the same time we need to feed our bodies and our souls in the most productive way possible. And if there is something you really want to go for, whether it's a relationship, a business idea, or something that you just feel very passionate about in terms of your creative talent, there's certainly rich potential to mine this month. Welcome Aries to your in-depth monthly forecast for March 2025. Now this is a month when you are going to have the magic of Mercury arriving in your sign on the 3rd to join up with Venus, but also with Chiron. But of course Venus goes into a retrograde on the 2nd. What I would tell you is that if we zone in on the 20th, when the Sun returns to your sign for the first time in 11 months, it is in a tight conjunction with Venus, despite the retrograde, but they're both angling superbly to Pluto in your sector of future hopes. But what you may find, particularly at the start of this month, is that you're uncertain about which way to go, and that's because of the collective right at the end of the sign of Pisces. And what the North Node, since the 11th of January, and also Saturn over the last couple of years have been asking you to do, is wind down the things that no longer serve your greater good. And it's not always easy to do that. You know, whether it's possessions that we've had for years may have a sentimental value, particularly with this Piscean energy, that it's difficult to let go of those. But there may be some practical things that we tend to hold on to because that gives us a sense of familiarity. So that could be one way that you could release. But equally at the start of this month, you could release old patterns of being and embrace a fresh way of being you. And that is going to gain traction this month, particularly with the solar eclipse, which occurs on the 29th, which is your last opportunity with this particular eclipse series to really put your foot to the floor when it's about the things that you're excited about. It's just that Venus and Mercury, although they're aligning quite beautifully for you, which could give you the platform to get something new off the ground, because they are in retrograde as the month goes on. In the case of Mercury, that's going to join up with Venus's retrograde from the 15th, and they're both inversing back into Pisces. So the key this month, I feel, Aries, is to make sure that your plan for what you want to achieve for this month is realistic, because you're a sign that although you read the pop astrology that says, oh, Aries, pile into things, get truly excited, and then get totally bored 5 minutes later, I really find that stuff very insulting to Aries, because you're the sign that listens to your instincts, but then has the courage to take action. But that can sometimes mean that you will make quick decisions and move away from situations in a very rapid manner. And I just feel that if you can just be conscious of slowing things down a little bit, it means that you will make more informed moves. And because Venus, despite its retrograde, is in such a fortunate link with Jupiter through the first phase of this month, the first week, some kind of serendipity can fall for you. But particularly if you do what you're classically famous for, have the confidence to take the first step. So whether it's someone that you're drawn to, whether it's a business idea that's been in the back of your mind for some while, whether it's a new approach to your health and diet, if you go for it and you go for it with meaning, but you do just at that initial part of the process, take a breath and really take some time meditating on what to do, you'll get the best of that late Piscean energy and the storming energy that you bring to situations, which I think is so incredibly exciting. Now, of course, your ruler Mars had been in retrograde since the 6th of December, right through to the 24th of February. But what I would say to you is that Mars this month does forge a very impressive angle to Uranus. And that's going to give you an opportunity to really be very decisive when it comes to your financial situation, but anything about a property. So if you are thinking about moving or changing your space to create your home, to create more room, which is a classic Uranian need, or to work from home more flexibly, there could be something very exciting that you can achieve with that. But that combination between Venus and Mercury is not one that should be underestimated, because Mercury can be the marketeer, Venus can be the money man. They're together, they're in your sign. As long as you feel that you're at the heart of the action and part of the process, that gives you much more motivation. If you don't quite feel in the loop, that won't work so well this month for you. So if you work in a job which you're not enjoying, I feel week 2 it's going to become manifestly obvious to you. And even if it's not your instinct to work for yourself, everyone wants to work in a situation where they feel seen. Not everybody expects to be knighted every day of the week for their services to their employer, but it's nice to get the occasional thank you for doing that. That's a great idea. And if you're not getting that, I feel the lunar eclipse, not just this month, but over the next 6 months, can really help to separate you from something that isn't working for you. It could be a job, it could be a relationship, to be honest, because what Saturn will do in its conjunction with the Sun and the opposition with the Moon, it will help you to stay grounded this month because of the Venus and Mercury energy, because of the vernal equinox, and because of the Aries solar eclipse. It could be characterised this month as a huge month of amazing opportunities. And out in YouTube land, you'll probably see some people saying that. But I think it is really important to know what your deeper motivations are, Pisces, and also what the consequences are, Saturn, at the heart of this month, for past endeavours, past connections, and there may be some things that you still need to release. And it could be some attitudes, it could be some just ways of being that have become rather familiar and comfy, but they don't really get you going in the way they could. So if you do find yourself rethinking with Mercury and Venus's retrograde, take it in your proverbial ram's stride. And that vernal equinox, despite Venus being in retrograde, does give you an opportunity to supercharge your future plan. But that's where Pluto comes to help you this month. The clearer you are about where you want to go, and the more that clarity feels right, the more you can take a giant step forwards this month, but staying sensitive to the parts of life which are less tangible, our gut feelings, compassion, being conscious of people who may have it a little worse than us. but by the end of the month, you can be really gaining traction. But I do feel there may be like a duality between a new beginning and a lot of old strands winding down. Have a great month, Aries. Please check out your special offer personal horoscope package. You can get your 12-month forecast for the year ahead, but also your life roadmap report. The combination of these two gives you an enormous amount of information. They're great value, totally unique to each person they're produced for, and please see the link below for more. They're 30% off. Welcome Taurus, your in-depth monthly forecast for March 2025. Your ruler Venus slams on the brakes on the 2nd in the part of your scope to do with the delicate equation of relationships, the 12th house. The 12th house can be, in traditional astrology, those so-called secret enemies, but also it can just be a time when we want to step back, have a little time for ourselves, to really contemplate what the big picture is about. Now, in some ways, with Pluto right at the top of your chart, your professional situation could be very much part of the equation. But don't be surprised if you find yourself this month, Taurus, linking back to an old skill, talent, experience, or contact in a very positive way, and that reconnection can be particularly productive for you around about the 23rd of the month. But because we do have a lot of Aries energy this month, which begins with Venus, and also, of course, with Chiron, but Mercury pitches up in the sign also on the 3rd. And right at the start of the month, Mercury's forging an inspirational link to the North Node, but also Neptune. If there is someone that you've been finding very engaging and enjoyable to be with, and it doesn't have to be romantically, the big test really this month is that because you will have Mercury going into the retrograde on the 15th, and also because we have the spring equinox on the 20th, which is in a conjunction with your ruler, but in your 12th house, that is going to require some care to deal with. Also, we have the 12th house solar eclipse. So it's almost like the planets initially tease up to you some kind of amazing possibility, but then ask you to almost straight away go into a deep period of discussion or analysis to decide exactly what to do. And talking of analysis, it really wouldn't be a surprise if some Taurus people wanted to get the support of a life coach, a business advisor, a counsellor, to get a deeper understanding of their psychology. But also it may be the case that for some Taurus people, someone from the past may call out for your attention. Now, this energy may come up within you. It could be that you get some kind of social media contact from someone you used to go to school with, used to work with, maybe even an old flame. Now, it doesn't mean to say that that wouldn't be a viable thing to reconnect to, but do bear in mind that everyone's individual circumstances are completely unique. But someone from your past could bring some kind of gift or good fortune to you, despite the fact that Venus is in its detriment in the sign of Aries, and that Mercury is going to go into its retrograde in your 12th house. Around about the 11th, you may be surprised that something just falls for you that's absolutely delightful. But if you're not sure about a romantic situation, there is no doubt at all, we can't disguise the fact that Venus and Mercury in the 12th house could be a time when you're really seriously thinking about what to do. And because in the last week of this month, Mars is forging such an incredibly dynamic link to Uranus, if there's part of you that does feel unfulfilled and wants to break free and do your own thing a lot more, that energy could really be very hard to resist. I also feel that the lunar eclipse means that any friendship, any hobby, interest, anything that you're passionate about, vis-a-vis what your long-term plan is about, is going to be checked. You may need to revise or look at something afresh, and you may need to be very, very realistic in terms of what you decide to do. And because we have the vernal equinox on the 20th, followed by on the 29th, the solar eclipse, they're kind of not letting you escape challenging some of your own sensitivities, your own anxieties or worries. And so therefore, if there's a job, a friendship, a love affair that really isn't quite right, you need to very honestly challenge yourself about why you might stay in that situation for the long term. Because remember, the long term is guided by the 11th house, and that's where Venus and Mercury return to at the end of this month. But strangely, it's where Neptune emerges from at the end of this month. And Neptune can distort, but it moving into your 12th house as March closes suggests to me any interest in spirituality, self-development, astrology is really going to become much stronger for you over the following 8 months. And from early next year, it's going to be something that becomes a massive part of your life journey in the years to come, once Neptune settles full time for the foreseeable future in the sign of Aries. So, at the heart of this month, that cazimi between the Sun and Saturn on the 12th is certainly giving you food for thought about any weaknesses. And this is a month which is asking you to be very, very honest about what you may be staying attached to because it feels safe, but is stealing your life force, your spark. So in some situations in life, we have to know when we might be avoiding an essential truth. And I think that this is the month, after Saturn asking some very tough questions, I do think Saturn's teased out of your friendship circle quite a few associates, close buddies that haven't really come up to the mark. And so by the end of this month, I think you'll be much clearer about where you need to align. Have a great month, Taurus. Please check out your special offer personal horoscope package. You can get your 12-month forecast for the year ahead, but also your life roadmap report. The combination of these two gives you an enormous amount of information. They're great value, totally unique to each person they're produced for, and please see the link below for more. They're 30% off. Welcome Gemini to your in-depth monthly forecast for March 2025. Your ruler Mercury is right at the heart of the action. At the very start of the month, Mercury is in a very shimmering, mesmeric connection between the North Node and Neptune. But that could create some uncertainties around your worldly interactions. In fact, your worldly interactions this month, Gemini, are going to be very tested with the lunar eclipse, which occurs on the 14th. In fact, just before that, on the 12th, exactly, there is a Saturn cazimi. And that could be when you become much more aware of a burden that you've been carrying for some time that's actually proven quite difficult to deal with. Or it could be where you have a breakthrough moment, either it's then or in the following 6 months, and you're going to seize a much higher position of visibility and perhaps an increase in your influence. Because as we come into this month, Gemini, the energy of last month's new moon is palpable. It provides a backdrop through this month, particularly with having also in the sign of Pisces, along with that Pisces new moon, the fact that it squared off to the traditional ruler of Pisces, Jupiter, in your sign. So that was kind of saying to you, as February came to a close, if you were going to make some claims, it was important that you could back them up. And initially, as you come into this new month, you may still be feeling very inspired. Now, if you are someone who's very gifted with film, photography, graphic art, technology, perhaps you work as a healer, a carer, anything to do with the expression of your imagination is certainly heightened by that new moon and that collective, including your ruler Mercury. But of course, Mercury in the sign of Pisces is detrimented. It dissolves or at least erodes its clarity. So since Mercury moved there, it hasn't necessarily been easy. But on the 2nd of this month, the planet of relating, Venus goes into a retrograde. And that suggests when it comes to your alliances, you might be surprised that some of yours could be tested this month, because although Venus and Jupiter forge a magnificent link through the first week, which could be lucky, because Mercury moves into a very positive place on the 3rd, also in Aries, and also is very close to Venus through the first 10 days of this month, there may be a lot of dazzling communication, but by the middle of the month, if there's any weaknesses in terms of who wants or is prepared to give to the situation, they are going to come very strongly into the open. And the potential for delays or breakdowns in communication is extremely strong, with Mercury inversing from the 15th through to April the 7th. But the big takeout, I think, is Saturn applying to that lunar eclipse, because that energy from the 14th is a backdrop for the next 6 months. If you're putting too much into your work and neglecting your home, family and emotional life, that's going to be something that Saturn's going to challenge you about. But it could be converse. It may be that your preoccupation with home, family and personal needs is stopping you seizing the opportunity to go for a golden prize, because Saturn can reward. Yes, it can be very much the hard taskmaster, but if you've really rolled your sleeves up over the last couple of years, you may have had a breakthrough with its help. It just depends on your unique circumstances. But then on the 20th, we do have a very exciting vernal equinox. They're always exciting. It's the first day of the new astrological year, which is based on the seasons. So the next 13 weeks for you is all about the potential for collaboration and cooperation. The more you go with that, the better it will be for you. But because Venus is in a retrograde and conjunct the vernal equinox, but both the Sun and Venus are angling very positively to Pluto, there is a change that can come about. And it may be to the big picture in your life. It may be that you're going to learn something very important by your collaborations or working closely with other people. But on the 23rd of this month, the link between the Sun and Pluto is almost exact. And because the 11th house, despite the retrograde to both Venus and Mercury, suggesting some slowdown, cross wires, something not quite going as you want, if you're someone who has a very clear vision of where you're heading in your life, and you're actually living through your inspiration, so you're going for your highest hopes, not just the practical and worldly sphere, that's a very significant sextile. But the 27th does see Venus invert back into Pisces. Venus likes being in Pisces more than it likes being in Aries in a technical way, but for you it suggests that diplomacy and a degree of people skills will be important to perhaps dissolve any blockage that came up with the Saturn application to that lunar eclipse. The 29th, however, sees that solar eclipse, the last in the series between Libra and Aries, this one in Aries. So if you can knit together, find areas of commonality, your friendships, your involvements with people from different walks of your life. You may be someone, and it's often the case with Gemini, who can get on with a vast array of different people, and all those different contacts could really sparkle for you off the back of that solar eclipse. But it wouldn't be a surprise if a lot of the discussion and a lot of the dialogue is actually about your professional situation. But by the end of the month, as Neptune steps forward into Aries and Mercury inverses back into Pisces, that's going to be a critical point for you, because we do have in week 3 the Sun forging a Mars forging a very potent link to Uranus. Now, Uranus is in the part of your chart so-called secret enemies, but I think what Uranus has been doing full time since March 2019 is actually stirring up a lot of subconscious stuff, maybe anger at times, maybe irritation, maybe your nerves, maybe it's been difficult to sleep, maybe you felt stressed at times. But in fact, Uranus is about innovation, and the link between Uranus and Mars at the end of this month could see you finding a new way forwards for your financial situation by treading the less trodden path. So doing something really fresh. But as the month comes to a close, you are, I feel, definitely going to be thinking long term. But I think it's your connections to others that are so critical this month, but particularly in your worldly interactions. And if the emotional vibe in certain relationships isn't very good, I feel that lunar eclipse at the heart of this month, more than the retrograde, is really going to test them because of the scrutinizing and demanding energies of Saturn. Have a great month. Please check out your special offer personal horoscope package. You can get your 12-month forecast for the year ahead, but also your life roadmap report. The combination of these two gives you an enormous amount of information. They're great value, totally unique to each person they're produced for, and please see the link below for more. The 30% off. Welcome Cancer to your in-depth monthly forecast for March 2025. It's a giant month for activity featuring your ruler, the moon, because we have two eclipses, but they're in two different eclipse series, and that's particularly pertinent because eclipses are tethered to the nodal axis. So right at the start of this month, the combination between Mercury, the communicator, Neptune, the planet of mystique, but also the North Node in your sister water sign of Pisces suggests a desire to expand your horizons. But any interest you have, whether it is through travel, if it is through creativity or artistry, in some way or another, I feel this is a month when you're wanting to raise your profile, and that's going to become even more obvious as the month goes on. But it begins with that combination of energy in Neptune. But it's a planet that's in your sector of success that also provides a narrative early on. On the second, Venus, the planet of relating, but also of money, goes into a retrograde, one which is going to go on through to the middle of April. It suggests that your contacts, particularly initially, whilst it's in Aries, with people in positions of influence, can benefit from diplomacy. But we're also going to see Mercury move into your sector of success on the 3rd. And the two, Venus and Mercury, are going to be collaborating in a very positive way right at the start of this month. So far, so good. We also have Venus forging a terrific link to Jupiter. Jupiter is the planet of fortune, but at the present time, at the start of the month, it continues its long journey through a more spiritual part of your scope. So it may be that you're talking about something that is very important to you at a deeper level that creates an opportunity. It may be a relationship, it may be something to do with healing or connecting to like-minded people. Now we're going to see on the 11th an exact conjunction between Mercury and Venus. If you're applying for a job, despite the fact that Venus is in retrograde, this could see something come up which really does excite you. But also we're going to see on the 14th a lunar eclipse, and this very much to do with that North Node in Pisces, because it's a lunar eclipse that sees the moon in an opposition with not just the sun, but also the strict and sometimes restrictive energies of Saturn. How you think, how you express yourself but also your belief systems are really going to come under the astral microscope. If you're doing something professionally, for example, that you're not really enjoying, I feel that the fact that Mercury goes retrograde the day after, like Venus, in your sector of success, it could be because you don't feel that you can communicate with the people that you're working with or for, or perhaps you don't feel enough mental stimulation, or perhaps it's an environment that's somewhat repressive, because Saturn applying to the Sun in the ninth house can make you much more aware of the values that you hold truly dearly. Now also, in week 2 of this month, Cancer, the Sun is going to get perfectly aligned to Saturn, and that cazimi occurs on the 12th, and that's going to be an important time too, just before the lunar eclipse. But remember, the lunar eclipse provides a backdrop for the following 6 months, so it's not just for 2 weeks. So if you do work somewhere where you feel it's difficult to express yourself, the more restrictive and restraining energies of Saturn can make you aware of that. But it can work to your advantage, this lunar eclipse. If you're wanting to study something and you're prepared to really apply yourself to the topic, you have a great opportunity in the next half year to actually gain some kind of certification or qualification that can give you a boost when it comes to those professional aspirations. But the 20th sees the vernal equinox, the most important date of the whole Western tropical astrological year, because it's the start of the new cycle. Here the Sun moves into the sign of Aries, joining up with Mercury and Venus, but in the case of Venus, this particular year's spring equinox is right by Venus. And I feel that that can bring opportunities for you, particularly because they're both linking back to Pluto, the planet of transformation, which for you is now in the part of your situation that's very much to do with deep transformation, and transformation around where you're most invested. Perhaps business-wise, perhaps financially, perhaps even romantically. But because the spring equinox is asking you to think about your role and connection to the world at large, again, if something isn't quite working for you, particularly with Venus retrograde and being to do with money, you may decide to actually move away from something that does have benefits but doesn't really engage you. It doesn't really make your soul come alive. Now you know that Mars, the planet of assertion, the planet of action, but also of impatience, was retrograde in your sign from the 6th of January to the 24th of February. But Mars is edging forwards, and it does provide a window of opportunity for you week 3 of this month. And if there is something that you're excited about and you want to be more spontaneous about, Mars is linked to Uranus, can certainly give you a lot of get-go when it comes to breaking free and being much more spontaneous and dynamic in the moment. But we do have Venus inverting back into Pisces on the 27th. Now, in technical terms, Venus within that retrograde is happier than in Pisces than she is in the sign of Aries. It's just that by the 29th we have the solar eclipse, the last in the series between Libra and Aries, this one in Aries. This is emphasizing again how you connect to that wider world. And this solar eclipse is very, very powerful for sure, and provides a 6-month window of opportunity when you can be more ambitious. So whatever goals and ambitions you've got, this is the time to set your intentions in a very meaningful way. But the 30th sees Mercury in its retrograde inversing back into Pisces. So if there is something that you've grappled with professionally and perhaps gained some kind of recognition, perhaps raised your profile, perhaps been quite pleased to be in the limelight, but if it doesn't feel right, the energy at the end of the month, particularly when Neptune moves into Aries as the month draws down, suggests that you may decide to separate yourself, have some kind of time out. It could be through a vacation, it could be through a vocation. But if you're not happy in your professional situation, whether it's the environment, the work you do, the processes you go through, the people you have to interact with, perhaps it's your beliefs that are challenged by the particular organisation you're in, by the end of this month, the very thing that was calling out to you at the very start of the month, as Mercury aligned with Neptune and the North Node, in a way which was really pushing you to open up and be much more spiritually in touch with what you need, that's demanding your attention as this month draws to a close. Have a great month, Cancer. If you've yet to check out my new website, please go to www.patrickarundell.com. You can grab yourself my special offer of your combination reports, of your life roadmap report, the most important document anyone could ever read, that helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our existence so far, but also your 12 months transit report as well, and there's 30% off. Each of these is totally unique to the person it's produced for. If you don't know your time, you can have my solar option. If you prefer to have whole sign, you can choose that. Or if you'd like to check out your draconic possibilities, your soul chart, you can also get any of those 30% off too. Please see the link below for more. Welcome, Leo, to your in-depth monthly forecast for March 2025. When we're all on form, it gives us the enthusiasm to push out, to do things in a more enterprising and adventurous way. When we're not feeling so good, we tend to be a little more protective. But because your sign is ruled exclusively in the zodiac by the sun, which is at the heart of all our existence, when you're really in the mood to do something dramatic, then that's something to behold. And this month we have the start of the astrological new year that occurs on the 20th, and it does see the sun as it enters the sign of Aries with the vernal equinox align with Venus, the planet of relating but also of money. Now there is a bit of a catch, Leo, because Venus is in retrograde, which begins on the 2nd. Venus is also not quite at its best in the sign of Aries, but I feel that event, which is the start of the new year, the astrological year, does give you a flavour of what lays in wait, because towards the end of this month we have the final solar eclipse in the sign of Aries in a series which has been going on for the last couple of years. But that particular event really can give you a backdrop for the following 6 months, because your ruler, the sun, is exalted in the sign of Aries to really turn up the glow, the afterburners, when it comes to mesmerizing people with your confidence, your flair, and your passion. But you know, that fiery energy, that enthusiasm, the preparedness to take on new possibilities has to compete with a complex set of energies that are emanating from the sign of Pisces, which of course is a water sign, and water is much more emotional. And right at the start of this month, tucked up behind Venus but late bunched up in Pisces, is the trio of Mercury, the communicator, but also the planet of precision, Neptune, the planet of dreams and mysticism, but also the North Node, which is like the collective direction of travel for us all at the moment, asking us to become much more conscious of what our fears, anxieties, and more subconscious motivations are about. So as you come into this month, there's part of you that may be wanting to be more adventurous. Mercury's going to move into Aries on the 3rd, and that certainly could get you thinking about destinations if you're planning a vacation or some higher education, or you want to retrain, or you just want to be more spontaneous. But remember Venus in that retrograde. Ironically, Venus and Mercury are going to be collaborating really well at the start of this month, as will Venus and Jupiter, the two planets of fortune. So one area that can work well for you at the start of March is your connections to friends, particularly friends that share your values or you really enjoy being with, but in a very free way, not necessarily a particularly structured way, where you can just lift your phone, give someone a ring, and just in a very spontaneous way arrange to meet up and go out and have a nice time. So those kind of energies definitely emphasised at the start of this month. But I feel it is important to understand that the nudge towards doing something different, more engaging, is asking you to understand what Venus in Aries is about. Venus in Aries is very much in its opposition to the sign it rules of Libra, which is about harmony. Venus in Aries is much more about doing what we want. But for you, the ninth house represents the point of truth. So if there is a personal relationship, even a business relationship, which isn't going very well, the truth of the matter will need to be faced this month, particularly if you're not aligned around things like intimacy, shared finance, or even financial planning for the future. Because in week 2 of this month, we are going to see a beautiful link between Mercury and Venus for sure, which can bring possibilities, particularly around a contract, but it needs to be absolutely watertight correct. And that's because on the 12th, the Saturn Cazimi is going to highlight any dissatisfaction you have where you feel you've put everything in and you've been very committed and invested emotionally, intimately, financially. If there's something that feels cool and not working for you, the freedom agenda of Venus and Mercury at this point of the month in Aries could see you thinking about the concept of escape, because the ninth house can be about freedom and individuality. It's not necessarily about devotion and connections, which is what that very powerful energy between the Sun and Saturn. And remember, the Sun is your ruler. So Saturn is going to bring a very cold, realistic, and perhaps very challenging energy to your situation this month. So if you're over optimistic with the Venus and Mercury energy initially, and knowing that you've got that spring equinox coming and the solar eclipse in Aries later in the month and Neptune moving into Aries too, it could see you be a little bit too quick to assume that everything will just go as you wish. So how do you deal with that Sun-Saturn energy? I think it really is looking some concerns directly in the eye, and it may mean becoming much more informed. The ninth house, I feel, particularly around finance and Venus and Mercury, the communicator, which itself goes retrograde mid-month, is asking you really to perhaps gain more insight, and that could come from a life coach, business consultant, it may come from an experienced friend. It could even come from some kind of counselling, because the 8th house is where we get beneath the surface of a situation, but the 9th house is where we have the openness to receive new ways of looking at things. So that brings us to the lunar eclipse of the 14th of March. It's the second in a series that began last September with the, at that time, lunar eclipse in the sign of Pisces. But this one has Saturn sat right on the Sun. And because for you, the position of the moon is in house 2, that's everyday money, but it's also your self-worth, your values. And that's competing where you connect to somebody else. So this ninth house energy, which emerges from the 20th, then has to compete with the fact that Mars, the planet of thrust, which rules the sign of Aries, actually forges a very interesting link with Uranus in week 3. And if you did want to do something completely different and you were prepared to be very experimental, perhaps even a tad risk-taking, you could do something very dramatically that works out well for you. So with Venus inverting in its retrograde back into Pisces on the 27th, you may find yourself having to revisit something that you had high hopes for right at the start of the month before Venus went retrograde, with that combination of Mercury, Neptune and the North Node. Then we have the solar eclipse. There's definitely an opportunity there to break out and do some very daring things over the next 6 months. But I feel that it needs to work financially for you, it needs to work with your values, it needs to work with who you're collaborating with. But I feel for some Leos, if you feel locked into a situation that is choking off your ability to be truly yourself, this could be a month when you actually need to escape. Now, the escape could be from a particular pattern of being. It may be escaping from some fearfulness about doing something different. It could be escaping from a job which may be well paid but not very fulfilling, or it could be escaping from a relationship which feels very controlling. But you may need to ask yourself the question, are you being a little controlling, perhaps towards yourself with that Saturn Cazimi, or is it someone else who's applying their leverage and coercion to you? Because by the end of this month, Mercury is going to invert back along with Venus into your 8th house. So I feel that as then Neptune steps forwards to join up with Aries, where it's going to be for the next 8 months, if there's something for you that's fundamentally choking off a need for a deep connection or a deep meaning, and the way forwards is actually being much more in touch with what you want to do as an individual, rather than honouring something that's shackling you in a way that's not good for your mental or psychological well-being, then that's the big question this month. So any situation which is stopping you really breathing in the oxygen of life in a way which really helps you to demonstrate the full range of your radiance, that's what you need to be looking about changing. And that's not always easy, particularly if we're locked into quite complex relationships, especially around money, maybe where we live, maybe there's shared resources, or even things like children, animals. These things can create a lot of complication. But if you do feel that you're not really living your life on your terms and values, this is going to be a month which challenges you and pushes you to do something that's much more daring. If you've yet to check out my new website, please go to www.patrickarundell.com. You can grab yourself my special offer of your combination reports, of your life roadmap report, the most important document anyone could ever read, that helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our existence so far, but also your 12 months transit report as well. And there's 30% off. Each of these is totally unique to the person it's produced for. If you don't know your time, you can have my solar option. If you prefer to have whole sign, you can choose that. Or if you'd like to check out your draconic possibilities, your soul chart, you can also get any of those 30% off too. Please see the link below for more. Welcome Virgo to your in-depth monthly forecast for March 2025. I'd like you to think back to last September the 18th. Then there was a lunar eclipse in the sign of Pisces. Well, this month on the 14th, we get the mirror of that event, the second in a series. This time it's in your sign, but we have on the other side of the heavens the combination of the Sun but also Saturn, and that's a critical event for the next 6 months, because if you recall, on the 11th of January the true nodal axis switched north through to Pisces, south through to Virgo, and this throws up a conundrum for all of us to make a better balance between the practical and very systematic part of your nature and the more emotional, spiritual, and watery energies of the sign of Pisces. But in your case, that particular eclipse is parked up in your 7th house. In traditional astrology, that's the sector of open enemies. So that's the people we have to deal with. We may not necessarily see them as outright opponents, but it could be, say, a boss that we're not that keen on working for, an organisation that, yeah, it pays the bills, but it doesn't inspire us. It could be even someone in the family or someone in our group of friends who always seems to have that little biting comment that can be quite wounding. But the 7th house can also be about where we relate, and it's also a very important area to set our boundaries, because if we think about it, the planet of Saturn is very much about boundaries and structures, but it doesn't work so well in the sign of Pisces, which can erode things because of the watery energy of the aquatic Neptune, which is the modern ruler of the sign. But of course, the traditional ruler of the sign of Pisces is Jupiter, and Jupiter's very much in the mix as you come into this month, because another lunation occurred at the very end of February, the new moon in the sign of Pisces, and that may have given you some encouragement about your relationship prospects for the following month. Quite rightly, it's just that that was squaring with Jupiter, which can be about abundance, but it can also be about overconfidence. And for you, Jupiter, where it is detrimented in Gemini, is very much about professional relationships. So as you come into this month, don't feel that just because we have the lunar eclipse in your sign that it doesn't change the fact there's still a huge amount of activity in your sector of relating. Not least that your ruler Mercury is connected to Neptune and the North Node over the first couple of days. If you've got planets late in the sign of Virgo, that could create some confusion, because the energies of Neptune can be very opaque, classic smoke and mirrors. There may be someone that you found rather mystical, alluring, but in some ways a little bit unavailable and not quite sure to know what to do about them. But paradoxically, Venus, the planet of relating but also of money, is in, as you start this month, the part of your chart to do with devotion, but slams on the brakes on the 2nd through to the middle of April. So if there is something around a business relationship, a professional one, maybe around a friendship, a family matter, or a romance, where your efforts to reach out, give people the benefit of the doubt, try to keep the lines of communication open, be very attentive to what they want, sharpening up your listening skills, all of that could be part of the new moon mix that you bring into this month. And that very spiritual alliance between Mercury, Neptune and the North Node could see you meet someone absolutely, totally enchanting. But Venus, by going retrograde on the 2nd, is asking you to be very careful about what is shaping up, because not everything may be as it seems. Your ruler Mercury actually gives you a lot of help on the 3rd. It steps out of your opposite sign, but it dives deep. You don your detective's mac on the 3rd. Mercury in the 8th house is brilliant for teasing out what's really going on rather than what we thought was going on. So you can find your perception sharpening up with Mercury's help. Ironically, Mercury and Venus forge a very strong alliance through the first week or so of this month, which could be good for you if you are someone who's entrepreneurial and wanted to do better with long-term finance. Maybe the Venus retrograde could be rethinking something that you did have a plan on and maybe finding a different way forwards. Just be aware, however, that Venus and Jupiter are actually forging a delicious link at the start of this month. So you could quite possibly be offered a contract, a role which could be very advantageous to you, but you need to make sure that it's not being oversold, because Jupiter can do that. But that brings us to the crunch point of the month, because in week 2 the sun moves forwards, it's tightening up, in its connection to the steely, cold, restrictive, and can be repressive energies of Saturn. We have on the 12th a Saturn cazimi. This is going to be a defining event, possibly for your whole year, around any relationship you're already in. I must reassure you, however, I had a client who came through to me and said that, I won't say who the astrologers are, but my relationship could end in divorce. Someone would leave me because of Saturn being in the 7th house. Now, I would always try to be very careful with my language. What I feel Saturn does is make us work very hard. If we roll up the sleeves, we put the application in, and with the application, the perspiration, we can get results. So it's equally possible that on the lunar eclipse by the 14th, that comes after the cazimi, and Saturn's still very much in the mix, that if you've really been clear about what you will or will not contribute and what you expect from the other person, and they're working equally hard as you, you could actually bake in an alliance that could last a lifetime. So yes, Saturn can be challenging, but it can bring results. It all depends on our unique circumstances, but also our attitudes. Now, the 15th sees your ruler join up with Venus in the retrograde. Mercury retrograde in Aries could potentially create frustration because the sign of Aries wants to achieve things quickly and decisively. But if you aren't sure about a relationship, the fact that Mercury joins Venus in its rewind is slowing you down to protect you, so you can cogitate over what's the right thing to do. That cogitation is going to be blessed too by the vernal equinox, the sun's arrival in the sign of Aries, the start of the new Western tropical astrological calendar, and its conjunction with the retreating Venus. But again, that could point towards some kind of extra financial success over the following 13 weeks. But equally, it could end a relationship which is not right for you, because the 8th house can be beginnings but also endings. The 27th, however, does give you a rich opportunity because Venus actually inverts in the retrograde back into your 7th house. If you have been thinking a lot and worrying perhaps and not quite sure of someone's intentions, perhaps Venus's retrograde, which is followed by Mercury back into Pisces on the 30th, is asking you to ask some searching questions to really get clarity on where the other person is coming from, or if you've been a bit confused or distracted. So a relationship could bond in this month, or it could break down, or there could be something that breaks down but then bonds together again. Inevitably, because of the North Node in the mix, some people will ask, is an old flame going to come back into my situation? I don't think it's impossible. Mars, the planet of action and of course of lust, forges a very decisive link with Uranus in week 3. That could see something happen very, very fast. And it may be linked to a friendship, it may be linked to a vacation, a sudden instant connection on a night out. And because of the 8th house energy that's fermenting at the end of this month, that can be quite lusty. And that's emphasized by the final solar eclipse in the sign of Aries within this eclipse series of the 29th. But that's very, very close to Neptune, the planet of magic, the planet of dreams, the planet of compassion, but also the planet of distortion. So because that Neptunian conjunction, even though it's just dissociate, Neptune arrives on the 30th, the day after, suggests if something isn't working that you wanted to be very committed, it could dissolve over the following 6 months. Saturn's going to remain in your 7th house of relating through to the 26th of May. But you know, when it goes into Aries, it's in its fall. And also the 8th house can be endings. So we can't see that as a panacea. It'll be there through to the end of August. It's going to come back into your 8th house early next year. But I feel that essentially from September onwards to the end of the year, and from now through to the 26th of May, you're really being asked to get much clearer about what it is you want in those connections. So even if you do have to, at some level, compete or connect with people you find a bit awkward to be with, part of life, Saturn can help you to work at your strategies to make it more effective in how you have those connections, but also how to protect yourself. In other words, where to say no. Because I feel Neptune in your 7th house since 2012 full time has probably, apart from 2012 itself when the North Node was last in that area, it's probably at times made it quite difficult to say no. But it also may have created some magical connections, as much as ones that may have hugely disappointed you, because that's what Neptune does. So by the end of this month, you may have gone on quite a journey in understanding what the whole relationship dynamic is. If you like the 7th house, where Saturn, Neptune, Mercury, the North Node are to begin the month, and where Venus and Mercury are by the end of the month, that's really about the conversation. The 8th house is really about the outcome, the consequences of the conversation. So if you bear that in mind, what you're looking for, if you're really wanting to collaborate and connect and partner up with someone in a way which really can be sustainable, you want to know exactly where you stand. And if you don't, you're really being encouraged by the end of this month to either go again, revisit it, have more dialogue, or to break free once and for all. If you've yet to check out my new website, please go to www.patrickarundell.com. You can grab yourself my special offer of your combination reports, of your life roadmap report, the most important document anyone could ever read, that helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our existence so far, but also your 12 months transit report as well, and there's 30% off. Each of these is totally unique to the person it's produced for. If you don't know your time, you can have my solar option. If you prefer to have whole sign, you can choose that. Or if you'd like to check out your draconic possibilities, your soul chart, you can also get any of those 30% off too. Please see the link below for more. Welcome Libra to in-depth monthly forecasts for March 2025. There's two big themes: relationships and practicalities and obligations. The month begins with the obligations to the fore, particularly if you've got planets towards the end of the sign of Libra, because the collective between Mercury, Neptune and the North Node, a gathering in the last degrees of Pisces, suggests that there's part of you, if you do have those late influences, that may want to help a situation and do your best. It could be around a job, could be around a voluntary role, but it's important that your boundaries work for you this month. And that's where the story starts to feed into the relationship dimension, because your ruler, Venus, is in your opposite sign as you start this month, and it's in a fantastic link to Jupiter, the planet of fortune. Of course, Venus is also a planet of good luck, the lesser benefit. So the two are collaborating as you go into this month. What's not to like? Well, it's that Venus is in detriment, but also from the second in retrograde. But if there is someone that you do feel respects how much you put into a situation, understands the commitment that you've shown, how hard you work, and there is a clear respect for that, some kind of binding relationship, despite Venus's retrograde, could shape up at the start of this month, because Mercury, the planet of communication, joins up with the sultry Venus on the 3rd in your opposite sign. When Mercury's going through the 6th house, and particularly when it's tangled with Saturn, it may have created quite a lot of stress, some brittle, tense energies. But in the 7th house, what it does is enables you to showcase one of your great talents, and that is for discussion. And having a two-way rapport. And Mercury in the 7th house can also help us to look beyond the details, the 6th house of Pisces, where we find differences more irritating, to accept that, well, it's okay for people to see things differently to me, as long as they hear where I'm coming from, because that's a very Libran energy. Mercury is about how we think, and it's also how we speak, but it can be about precision as well. So I feel that Venus's retrograde through to the 13th of April is undoubtedly going to see you thinking carefully about relationships. But it's not the only hit on Venus this month. Venus's influence on March is huge. So by the 11th, Mercury and Venus come together in an exact relationship. If you're fortunate enough to have that situation where you do feel seen, heard, appreciated, that could be a magical moment, perhaps for a date as much as a business relationship. But we also have a big slice of reality which kicks in on the 12th, because in week 2 of this month, Libra, the energies of Saturn are joined by the energies of the Sun. If we think that the Sun's at the heart of our existence and Saturn's very much about limitation, the energies of the Sun can be dampened. If you are someone who tends to be very conscientious, and you are working in a situation where no amount of diplomacy on your part is making any difference to however anyone feels about you, and you don't feel very seen or appreciated, that combination between the Sun and Saturn could see you feeling quite dispirited and actually a bit washed out energy-wise. And that's because what happens then is that on the 14th we have the second of an eclipse series featuring the 2 signs of Pisces and Virgo. If you recall, on the 18th of September last year, it was in the sign of Pisces. This one is in the sign of Virgo, but that cold energy of Saturn is applying to the Sun and opposing the Moon. If you work in a situation where there is office politics, where there is a lot of expectation to get a lot from you, but not for a lot of reward, with Mercury turning retrograde on the 15th through to April the 7th, that could see you rethink any kind of relationship where you feel there is more give than get. But on the 20th, we do have the start of the new astrological year and the first cardinal quadrant, first 13-week period of the year. Western tropical is predicated on seasons, but this particular event, with the Sun returning to your 7th house, great for you setting your boundaries, but also having a more passionate interaction with others. The key is that the retreating Venus is very close to the Sun, so that could glow up your relationship prospects for the following 13 weeks. Despite the retrograde, it just may mean that there's a rethink or resetting in the process, because we know that Mercury retrogrades can cause cross wires. I think this one could do that. The key is being very intent and clear about what you want from situations and what you're prepared to give. Now in week 3, you do get a chance to be actually extremely decisive, because Mars moved into your 10th house of authority on the 4th of September last year, but it moved forwards in early November last year into your sector of the collective, sociability, friendships, but then of course it went into the retrograde on the 6th of December, returned to your sector of work, responsibility, obligation, but ambition and success on the 6th of January through to the 24th of February. And that probably created a lot of frustration around work. So the fact that Mercury is in retrograde suggests, along with Mars forging such a dynamic link with Uranus, the planet which is the disruptor of the zodiac, could see you seize an opportunity around a business situation that maybe is revisiting something that's been discussed before, and that is because of Mercury retrograde. Ironically, also on the 27th, Venus returns back into your 6th house. You may need to make some concessions, be a bit more practically considerate. I'm not saying you aren't, around work relationships, but on the 29th we have a solar eclipse, the last in a series between your sign and Aries, but that is very close to Neptune. Neptune just in the sign of Pisces at this stage is a shimmering energy. There could have been times when all the hard work and input that you've put in since 2012 with Neptune in the sign of Pisces and in 2012 aligning with the North Node, which is being repeated, when you have gained a lot of gratification from doing a good job well. But I rest my case, if you're in a situation where you don't feel appreciated, or it's very hostile or bitchy, not very easygoing, all your goodwill, which is a key part of the way you like to do things, will count for absolutely nothing if you don't feel the fundamentals, the practical part of your situation is working. And that's emphasised with Mercury joining with Venus in returning back into your 6th house. So you could find yourself having some very key discussions this month, but they don't turn out to be binding, and there may be more details that need to be picked over. But that solar eclipse does suggest for the 6 months from the 29th, something could change around your relationships, but it may be shimmering, it may move around. It may seem that it's there, but then it's out of reach because of Neptune. Then on the 30th, not only does Mercury invert back into Pisces, your 6th house practicalities, Neptune takes that step forward for 8 months into your 7th house. And the uncertainty around relationships, or the potential for a magical connection, are almost polar opposite, but also very possible. It just depends, as usual, on your unique circumstances, your approach, and your personal natal chart. So to distill this all down, relationships can be a big part of the opportunity this month, but the detail is going to be massively important too. And if there is some snags which you find hard to get beyond, that Saturn cazimi on the 12th is huge. And the fact that Mercury and Venus are in retrograde suggests you may have to look at situations again, or be flexible, or you may find that another person keeps, as you see it, moving the proverbial goalposts. It's been a pleasure being with you, Libra. If you've yet to check out my new website, please go to www.patrickarundell.com. You can grab yourself my special offer of your combination reports, of your life roadmap report, the most important document anyone could ever read, that helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our existence so far, but also your 12 months transit report as well. And there's 30% off. Each of these is totally unique to the person it's produced for. If you don't know your time, you can have my solar option. If you prefer to have whole sign, you can choose that. Or if you'd like to check out your draconic possibilities, your soul chart, you can also get any of those 30% off too. Please see the link below for more. Welcome Scorpio, it's your in-depth forecast for March 2025. Your two ruling planets are Mars and Pluto. Mars, if you recall, went through that retrograde in your sister water sign of Cancer from the 6th of January through to the 24th of February. But as you go into this month, Mars is unshackled, and in fact is going to forge a very dramatic alliance with Uranus, the planet which is in your sector of relating, which covers week 3. So that could lead to some dazzling and very quick moving unfoldings, but also Pluto, the planet of truth, transformation, deep evolution. It's on your 4th house cusp, and that's going to be very much in the picture this month too. So where you live, how you live there, who you with, how you feel about your emotions, the things that you can keep quite private. But the story at the start of this month gathers most of all on your sister water sign of Pisces, with a quite unique, exquisite connection between Mercury, Neptune and the North Node for the first 2 days. Now, if you've got planets right at the end of Scorpio, that could be a wonderful chance for you to connect to your talent, your inherent creative spring, your well of possibility, and something can come from you that's really quite sensational. But also, the position of Venus, the relator, but also the money planet, on the 2nd sees it go into retrograde, into the fiery sign of Aries, which of course, like your sign, co-ruled by Mars. What's the implication of this? Because Venus is actually going to be retracing its steps all month to the point that it returns on the 27th back into the sign of Pisces. Now, the 5th house for you, that Pisces energy, is where you can showcase your radiance. But what's been making it difficult to showcase your radiance is the presence of the rather mean, as in terms of its perceived reputation, of Saturn. So the last couple of years, if you have made progress around a love relationship, around your creative talents, your flair, you've probably had to really apply yourself and work jolly hard. But the fact that Venus is joined by Mercury on the 3rd of this month, stepping out of Pisces and into your 6th house, but it too will go retrograde mid-month, suggests that the 6th house energy, which is building up this month, very much about everyday structures, the detail of things, what we eat, drink, how we get exercise, our work, responsibilities. It's a very Virgoan energy. So Virgoan energy is to the fore, but both Venus, which goes retrograde on the 2nd, and then Mercury from the 15th in retrograde, could see you rethinking those areas. Now, if you are someone who is a creative and is summoning up something quite special from the depths, what I feel that energy in Aries is asking you to do, and it's not just Venus and Mercury, it is the vernal equinox bringing home the sun back into Aries on the 20th, and then the solar eclipse on the 29th. They're asking you to make sure that whatever talent or whatever you want to bring to pass that's more to do with joy and fun, you're going to have to work for it, because the 6th house is about, in some ways, making sure we're very conscientious applied to the processes. It's not very sexy, is it? However, if you're looking for a job, despite Venus's retrograde, Venus and Mercury connect beautifully on the 11th in a conjunction. Also, Venus and Jupiter, the planets of good fortune, are in a terrific link at the start of this month. So if you're prepared to be a little bit more aware of what other people want from you, and you're prepared to bend into that, I feel that you could even squeeze more from your resources by taking a fresh look at some of your long-term financial planning. But some good fortune, despite that Venus retrograde, could fall for you early in this month. And it may be converting something that you've put your talent and flair into, and you're prepared to then make it work in a practical way as well. So the classic form and function. But that brings us to the 14th, well, the 12th, I should say, because we have a Saturn cazimi. What is a cazimi? Well, it's when the sun moves forwards and applies in an exact unified conjunction with another planetary player. What the sun does is amplify the energies of the other planet. But Saturn is cool, it's detached, it's exacting, it demands something. The sun, however, in the 5th house can be flamboyant, warm, gregarious. Now, if you are putting your heart into something that you feel strongly about, you could see some real concrete rewards shaping up in week 2 of this month. But if you're in a loveless relationship, which seems to be a lot of obligations, a lot of expectations, you're working very hard, but it's not much fun at home, I think that cazimi could see you feel a bit low in vitality and low in enthusiasm. Also, you may find that someone's very critical and asking quite a lot of questions about how much you're putting into a situation. That brings us to the lunar eclipse, therefore, the following 2 days on the 14th. Saturn's still in the mix. If we go back to the 18th of September, the first of this eclipse series occurred in the sign of Pisces, but at that time the sun was in the sign of Virgo. So for you, the energy of Virgo is about your connections to others, your long-term plan, your higher ideals. The fifth house is where you want to showcase what's really important to you, the individual. But because Saturn is there, if you feel that you can't really express yourself because of the demands or expectations of others, that can actually be very oppressive, not just this month, but over the next 6 months. Now, Mercury goes into retrograde along with Venus on the 15th through to April the 7th. Now, we know Mercury retrogrades can cause snags and details to go awry. Just be aware, in the 6th house, a trusted domestic appliance could go on the proverbial blink, or you could find that someone's a bit of a nitpicker at work. Make sure that you concentrate hard so you don't give them any opportunity to criticize you. But also the 20th sees the vernal equinox. The sun returns to Aries, but it's very close to Venus. This does give you a window of opportunity for the following 13 weeks, that if you're not very happy in a job, or your life structure isn't quite as ordered as you would like, you can do something about it, particularly as both are linking so powerfully to Pluto in your 4th house. So how you feel about obligations really is very strongly to the fore at this part of the month. Then Venus inverts back into Pisces, followed by Mercury on the 30th. So it could be a little bit of more of a social vibe, a bit more outgoing as the end of the month. But the solar eclipse on the 29th, very close to Neptune, just in Pisces still. This is a 6-month energy. If you are someone who has great perception, if you work in a healing capacity, psychic, a nurturer, a life coach, you're an artist, you work with film or video, any of those areas could be really boosted if you're looking for a job, because your perceptions are going to be supercharged. But then, as we get to the last day of the month, Neptune moves out of your 5th house, where he has been since 2012, creating some magical moments in terms of your social life at times, and perhaps at other times some moments of excess, to be truly honest. But he moves into the much more practical 6th house, where he's asking you to be more conscious of your physical health based on your emotional well-being, and that's something that goes on for the following near to 8 months. So this month, despite having that Pisces energy, which can be about flair, creativity, romance, fun, the stern Saturn is going to be a huge player. The fact that Venus and Mercury are going retrograde in your 6th house of practicalities and work and obligation, then we have the vernal equinox, then we have the solar eclipse in those areas too. Something's shifting, but the lunar eclipse at the heart of the month is essentially saying, if something in your life is out of kilter and you don't feel what's important to you as an individual is really glowing up, you have to do something about it, even if the steps out of it are ultimately, initially, quite practical ones and won't necessarily give you the instant reward that the sun's craving for until it moves into Aries, which is really for you to gain much greater admiration and respect for what makes you so special. If you've yet to check out my new website, please go to www.patrickarundell.com. You can grab yourself my special offer of your combination reports, of your life roadmap report, the most important document anyone could ever read, that helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our existence so far, but also your 12 months transit report as well, and there's 30% off. Each of these is totally unique to the person it's produced for. If you don't know your time, you can have my solar option. If you prefer to have whole sign, you can choose that. Or if you'd like to check out your draconic possibilities, your soul chart, you can also get any of those 30% off too. to, please see the link below for more. So Sagittarius, your March 2025 forecast is intriguing. There's so much energy that's going to be manifesting in the most outgoing, playful, fun-loving part of your chart, the 5th house, but not without some complications because of 2 retrogrades that are going to apply to Venus and Mercury in that area. But a part of your life that's been very, very much to the fore astrologically over the last couple of years is all about where you live, how you live there, and who with. And that's because of the rather potent energy of Saturn. Saturn can be a hard taskmaster, and it's been pushing you through these last 24 months to make sure that you are working at how you feel about things. But also it could have seen you renovating, downsizing, moving home. It could have seen people leave home, could have seen a new addition to the family. It just depends. There may have been an elderly parent or relative that's required your support. But generally speaking, how things feel has been a very big part of your equation. Now, as we start this month, there is a collective at the end of the sign of Pisces where Saturn is, which suggests something really quite delightful could happen. For example, it may be a family gathering or reunion, or you could feel particularly nostalgic for someone from your past, getting out old photograph albums, looking at pictures online. But there's a big change that comes quickly because Venus, the planet of relating but also of money, goes into retrograde on the 2nd, but it is still in contact with your ruler in your sector of relationships. So even though Venus going retrograde could slow down a hope with someone that you find very attractive, or it may mean that something you want to be more speculative around finances, you're not quite sure about, but it's boosted by the arrival of Mercury on the 3rd. So the angle between both Venus and Mercury, but back to Jupiter in the early part of this month, can actually be very helpful to you if you are wanting to re-engage with people, to break free of some of that limiting energy that Saturn has been creating in the last 2 years. But Saturn is still going to play quite the role this month. If we go through to the 3rd, Mercury into Aries, it's a great place for Mercury to be. It can be very much more outgoing, can be a bit cheeky, maybe even a bit mischievous. Mercury is the communicator planet, but it's also about precision. If you've got ideas that you want to bring to life, Mercury is giving you the nudge to express them. Show your passion and enthusiasm to others and they get caught up. That's a very major part of your nature that's getting a break. But on the 11th, the combination between Mercury and Venus, the conjunction, could be excellent to go on a date, have some kind of conversation that is to do with being more daring in your life in some ways. But we can't escape the fact that in week 2, Sagittarius, the Sun and Saturn are very closely together, and by the 12th they come into an exact conjunction known as a Saturn cazimi. Now cazimis can be very positive, but Saturn's not particularly happy in Pisces. Saturn likes structure, Pisces hates structures, it's limitless. So it may be that Saturn's combination with the Sun does bring something to pass that you want. For example, it could be you get the keys to a new flat that you've rented or leased, or a property that you're buying. It may be that you sell some real estate. It may be that you build something in a way that gives you satisfaction. So that could be, for example, refitting your kitchen or your bathroom, because Saturn can be about putting in place something that can be lasting. But because we have the lunar eclipse, which follows on quickly after this, the second in the series between the signs of Pisces and Virgo, the Sun very close to Saturn still, face to face with the position of the Moon high in the sky in your chart. That's going to make it much more difficult to disguise how you feel, not just this month, but over the next 6 months. So if those rather potentially tricky or challenging or limiting home or emotional situations are in some ways preventing you from going out in the world and just wooing people with your immense flair and ability. It could be something that weighs heavily upon you. But on the 15th, Mercury goes retrograde in your 5th house. It could mean, to be honest, it goes through to the 7th of April. It's going to invert back into the sign of Pisces on the 30th, but it could mean that a date you set up at this part of the month might not quite happen, or there can be a change of plan on some kind of social gathering or meetup. If there is something that you're very inspired about, there may be something that just blocks you at this stage, which could be very frustrating. But on the 20th, we have the vernal equinox, and this is something for you to truly celebrate, because this is when the sun returns to Aries, but the significance is much wider, because this is the first degree, the spring equinox, of the new astrological year, but it's all about the elements. So the fire element, which of course is richly important to you, is manifested in a very potent way for the following 13 weeks. But also Venus, despite its retrograde, is very close to that vernal equinox. And Venus in the 5th house can be very romantic. So despite the retrograde, and despite Mercury going into retrograde, if there is some kind of delay or misunderstanding, or someone mucks you around and you feel, this is all about Mercury retrograde, it actually could be for a wider reason that could be revealed over the following 13 weeks. So keep the faith if that happens. Now Mars, since the 6th of January this year, was back in your 8th house. 8th house is very much about desire. It's a very scorpionic energy, which Mars traditionally rules, but it forges a stunning link to Uranus in week 3 this month. You could have a brilliant business idea that could really have legs. And what's really interesting, that although Venus inverts back into Pisces on the 27th, which is actually a very nice place for Venus to be, it's exalted here, may see you wanting to reshape your home in some ways, decoratively, buy some new objet d'art or furnishings. But then on the 29th, we have the solar eclipse in Aries, the last of that series, which also provides a backdrop for the following 6 months. So there is that fiery, warm stuff coming in for you, and it is coming in a big way. And it's going to give you the opportunity to demonstrate that part of you that I feel Saturn has been choking off. So despite Mercury inverting back into Pisces on the 30th and Neptune stepping forwards for just under 8 months for the first time in 163 years, don't be deflected if things aren't going quite at the pace you want. Because what Saturn's really been asking you to do, Sagittarius, is actually own how you feel. Your innate enthusiasm and bubbliness means that when you have knockbacks, what happens is you often just dust yourself down and go again. It's a great gift, but the problem is, I feel, for Sagittarius, the bits and pieces of unresolved issues can build up, and I feel that Saturn's brought those home to roost over the last couple of years. So if you have felt at times really quite washed out, a bit depleted, maybe on the low side emotionally, disappointed, a lack of familial support, perhaps your housing situation has been far from ideal, perhaps your family life is not quite as you want, know that all this fire energy coming in can be so good for you, but particularly because that vernal equinox doesn't just link to Venus in its retrograde, it links to Pluto. And Pluto now is in a chattier part of your scope, a much more interactive one which is much more about fast exchanges of information. So I feel that something's going to percolate for you at the end of this month, but Saturn and the return of Venus and Mercury into your 4th house are just asking you to stay in touch with how it really feels and not being hung up about that. If you are someone who is very prideful, wants to maintain an aura of competence and that you don't have any vulnerabilities. Nothing phases you. It's all go, 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 positive, positive, positive. Saturn will continue to make life tough for you. If you accept, like the rest of us, that you have frailties, vulnerabilities and fears, but you're more in touch with how you can work with them and own them and make them become part of you in a way which is nothing to be shameful of, you're actually clearing the way to release a lot of energy that may be blocking you up. And like a furnace, the solar eclipse this month and the vernal equinox are really going to bring rewards to you over the months ahead. It's just about really getting in touch with how things feel, not overreaching, being okay with what you feel your boundaries are and your limitations. Don't judge yourself. And the beautiful part of your nature, that rich enthusiasm and fun-loving part of your nature and jovialness can come back. It's just a joviality with a greater amount of wisdom. If you've yet to check out my new website, please go to www.patrickarundell.com. You can grab yourself my special offer of your combination reports, of your life roadmap report, the most important document anyone could ever read, that helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our existence so far, but also your 12 months transit report as well. And there's 30% off. Each of these is totally unique to the person it's produced for. If you don't know your time, you can have my solar option. If you prefer to have whole sign, you can choose that. Or if you'd like to check out your draconic possibilities, your soul chart, you can also get any of those 30% off too. Please see the link below for more. Welcome Capricorn to your March 2025 monthly forecast. Your ruler Saturn has been quite exacting over the last couple of years, but particularly around your mode of personal expression, your ideas, your interactions. You may have experienced some snags or frustrations around neighbours, siblings, technology, perhaps even a mode of transport. And this month, on the 12th, the Sun applies in its annual Saturn cazimi. This only happens once a year when the Sun merges with Saturn and glows up Saturn. So Saturn and the Sun is an interesting cazimi because obviously Saturn can be on the cool side. It can be about limitations. But if there is something that you're working on that requires a lot of thought, but also a lot of investment, of energy and commitment, that combination can be fascinating for you because it works its way around the lunar eclipse right at the heart of this month, which provides a backdrop for the next 6 months. And this lunar eclipse is all about ideas. Expressing yourself can be about travel as well. But as you come into this new month, the new moon, which occurred at the end of February, is still very powerful, and that merged in a right angle with Jupiter, the planet of growth, but also the traditional ruler of the sign of Pisces. So the potential to be very enthusiastic is very enriched at the start of March, not least that Mercury, the planet of communication, is in a mesmeric combination with Neptune and also the North Node. That means that your imagination, as well as your conviction and your assertion and hard work that comes from Saturn, can be heightened along with that new moon. So the mode of thought, the way you express yourself, very important indeed. So why isn't that going to be the only theme this month? Well, it is because Capricorn, on the 2nd, Venus, which is in your 4th house of Aries, which is very much to do with where you live, goes into retrograde. If you are not completely happy with your home as it is decoratively, you may decide with this retrograde to do something about it, and that could be getting out the colour charts, experimenting with different looks, perhaps hitting some vintage stores for some new furnishings, going on that famous online site to buy something at good value where you can reshape how things seem. But of course the fourth house isn't just about the physical structure, it is about how we feel. So family relationships can also be very much part of the process, not least because Mercury joins up with Venus on the 3rd. But Mercury in the fourth house is not its best location. We know that Mercury is detrimented in Pisces, but in the fourth house we can think, but we find it quite difficult maybe to output the emotion behind it. But they do combine very well in the early parts of this month. If you were wanting to get together with a family reunion or meet up, maybe even a rapprochement if there have been some tensions, the potential's there, particularly by the 11th when they are exactly conjunct. But also Jupiter, the planet of fortune, links well with Venus too. You could be blessed by someone's generosity, maybe even an aunt or an uncle, or if your passion is for a pet, that can also bring some great joy at the start of this month too. But that brings us to the 12th, when the Sun reaches that exact combination with Saturn. And if there is something that you're not completely satisfied with, the lunar eclipse, which follows 2 days later, around how you feel heard. If you do have thoughts, for example, that you don't feel that people very close to you are so attuned to, that can be a point of frustration over the following 6 months. But the position of the moon is in the part of your chart in Virgo, which is to do with new experiences. So if you do feel a bit locked in to an everyday reality, because the 3rd house is the everyday routine that doesn't really work for you, I feel that some goats could be thinking about relocating, and that conversation or thought process around it can intensify from the 15th when Mercury goes retrograde. But if you are hoping to get more support or understanding from someone close to you, remember Mercury retrogrades can make communications challenging. The 20th, however, sees the vernal equinox, the start of the astrological year. The Sun returns to Aries, joining up with Venus, Mercury, and also Chiron. But this vernal equinox sees the Sun very close to the position of Venus in the retrograde. So over the following 13 weeks, if you do feel that your home life is a bit locked in, limited, you don't feel it's very stimulating, you don't like the neighbourhood you live in, for example, or you feel a job is too dull, you may be wanting to change something because you're wanting to change how it feels. And that actually is really great, because feeling is something that isn't fashionable. The sciences are fashionable, and also because Pluto in your 2nd house of money is linking to the vernal equinox and Venus, but particularly by the 23rd exactly, some kind of transformation about what you want in terms of your immediate emotional world or the foundations of your situation can start to play out. Ironically, Venus in its retrograde returns to Pisces on the 27th. Venus loves being in Pisces. If you didn't get heard the first time round, you can try again. Mercury's going to join her on the 30th. So something that you set your sights on at the start of this month, with that new moon energy pouring, cascading into this new month, in the square with Jupiter, it's very enthusiastic. The link between Mercury, Neptune and the North Node right at the start of this month. If you're still not getting the feeling, there may be more discussion to be had, and it could happen at the end of this month. But because of the solar eclipse on the 29th, the last in the series of Aries Libra, this one Aries, for the following half year, is very close to Neptune, even though that's still just in Pisces. So if you've perhaps thought, for example, about living by the seaside, or relocating somewhere that's very rural or peaceful, or you've wanted to create perhaps a space in your home that gives you some kind of real tranquility, All these Aries energies this month are kind of nudging that, but there needs to be a conversation about it. If it's nothing to do with that, if it's more to do with just not feeling very comfortable within yourself in terms of who you're having to connect to in your life, and you're not enjoying a job, a home, a personal relationship within the family, I think by the end of this month, as Mercury returns to Pisces, but Neptune steps forwards, it may be something that you have to really emotionally connect to in order to find the solution. So whilst the lunar eclipse is asking you to think about things, Saturn's suggesting that you shouldn't overthink it and you shouldn't try to force any thoughts, and there could be some tense discussions with that lunar eclipse. But the solar eclipse, the vernal equinox, Venus and Mercury, whilst they're in Aries, despite the retrograde, are saying, tune into how it feels. It will guide you. Let your sixth sense get the upper hand. If you've yet to check out my new website, please go to www.patrickarundell.com. You can grab yourself my special offer of your combination reports, of your life roadmap report, the most important document anyone could ever read, that helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our existence so far, but also your 12 months transit report as well, and there's 30% off. Each of these is totally unique to the person it's produced for. If you don't know your time, you can have my solar option. If you prefer to have whole sign, you can choose that. Or if you'd like to check out your draconic possibilities, your soul chart, you can also get any of those 30% off too. Please see the link below for more. Welcome Aquarius to your in-depth monthly forecast for March 2025. As we come into this month, the power and potency of the new moon, which occurred last month, is very much to the fore. Why is this? Well, it's because it occurred on the last day of last month. New moons have an influence of 4 weeks, but that was a new moon which squared off to Jupiter, the planet of hope, enthusiasm, optimism, and good fortune in your 5th house. What makes that particularly significant is the 5th house is the sector of speculation and accumulation. So if you're someone who is up for a flutter, or there's some kind of new business idea that's inspiring you, your enthusiasm can certainly be maxed up as you enter this month. But there's also a shimmering conjunction between Mercury, Neptune and the North Node in your 2nd solar house of everyday money, and that does require a little bit of care. If you're someone who has a real interest in helping good causes, that's a lovely combination, and it may see you decide to volunteer, go on some kind of sponsored fundraiser, or perhaps give some money to a good cause. But Mercury's soon going to be switching. But first of all, we need to be mindful of Venus. Venus starts this month in the sign of Aries. Venus technically is debilitated in Aries. I personally like Venus in Aries. I feel that Venus in Aries gives us the encouragement to go for what we want and desire quickly. But the 3rd house is about how we articulate ideas, and it is going to be an extremely important part of your month's journey, because Venus goes retrograde on the 2nd, but Venus can be about money and it can be about values as much as relationships. But the 3rd house and Venus points towards things like internet dating, because the 3rd house is quick communication, and Venus, remember, particularly in Aries, goes for what it wants quickly. So it could see some Aquariuses swiping for fun. But Mercury, the planet of communication, moves to join up with Venus on the 3rd. Now, Mercury is really exciting for you in this part of your chart because it's immediately linking back to Pluto in your sign, having returned to Aquarius on the 19th of November for its 3rd visit. And that means that as Mercury steps forwards, if there's something you want to express to someone that you're very passionate about, you can do so with authority. Your ability to understand ideas in a very penetrative way is going to be strong because of Pluto applying to Mercury. Mercury is how we think, but it can also be how we analyse. But the third house generally is quite a Gemini type influence. But your passion, along with your desire, Venus, but your communicational skills, a big part of Aquarius nature, very strong as this month begins. But if something's offered to you financially just before these two start to connect, and they do come into an exact alliance on the 11th, just be sure that the clarity is not in any way muddled, because with Neptune and Mercury and the node initially together at the start of this month, what you're told about something financially might not be quite right, and because of the square from Jupiter to the new moon, something could be exaggerated. You need to make sure it's not your approach. But also, Jupiter forges a stunning link to Venus at the start of this month, and Jupiter in the 5th house is not just about life's pleasures or being a bit more daring or speculative. It can also be about social interaction. It can be about romance. And of course, Jupiter is the planet of fortune, and Venus the planet of fortune too. So they're also aligning brilliantly at the start of this month. So we could focus on Venus retrograde in a very negative way, and also the new moon in a negative way because of the square, and because Neptune can distort the clarity of a financial discussion. So just cutting through all of that, I feel your ability, particularly with Pluto's help, to cut through to what's really important, suggests that something very exciting can manifest itself for you in the first 10 days of this month. What's not to like? Well, it's just that your traditional ruler, Saturn, has been in your 2nd house the last couple of years, and it hasn't been making life easy. You may have felt at times that other people have questioned your values, they may have questioned your sincerity, and you may have found that money coming into you was quite pinched. It hasn't necessarily been easy. But what Saturn does is makes us work very hard. And if you've really shown that industry and that application, it's possible by the 12th, as we have the Saturn Cazimi, that you'll be able to see the foundational basis of a lot of effort starting to really bear fruit. And that could be exciting. What's not to like? Well, it's just the lunar eclipse on the 14th, the second in the new series between the signs of Pisces and Virgo. This one is in Virgo. So just balance in the books between the ins and the outs, what you want as an individual, your everyday budget, the position of Saturn and the Sun, and your connections to others. If there is any controversy about any kind of deal, it could show up in the next 6 months, unfortunately, from that lunar eclipse. And also because Mercury goes retrograde on the 15th. So although Mercury, Venus and Jupiter all forge those magical interactions, Mercury retrograde suggests that there could be some rethinking to do. We know Mercury retrogrades can be tricky when it comes to travel, technology, ticketing, buying things online, misunderstandings, cross wires, all those classical Mercury retrograde areas. But of course, Mercury retrograde can also be an opportunity to look at something in a fresh way and learn from that. And in fact, by the 20th, as the Sun moves into Aries, we have the vernal equinox, the start of Cardinal Quadrant 1, and also the Western Tropical Astrological Calendar. It's the most important date of the whole year, but that links brilliantly to Venus, despite its retrograde, in a conjunction, and they're both linking back to Pluto in your sign, which reaches a peak on the 23rd. So that can be an excellent moment for you, because when Venus and Pluto are working well and collaborating, but particularly the Sun and Pluto, we get transformation. So some kind of transformation can be positive for you. But ironically, on the 27th, Venus in its retrograde steps backwards into Pisces. Now Venus loves being in Pisces, it's exalted, and Venus loves being in the second house. That's its more Taurian energy, and that could bring, ironically, in the retrograde, some money to you. Even though retrogrades usually are seen as being when things slow down. Also, the solar eclipse, the last of a series in Aries and Libra, this one Aries, on the 29th, is very close to the shimmering energies of Neptune. The part of your nature that can be extremely idealistic suggests that your conversation or your viewpoint can have huge impact on people over the following 6 months. Also Mars, which of course went through the big retrograde from the 6th of December through to the 24th of February, but latterly from the 6th of January in your 6th house of practicalities, that's forging a stunning link with Uranus. Uranus has been making your home and emotional and family life really quite challenging, I feel, over the last few years. But you could see a way that you can break out and set up a new paradigm, which may require some kind of reorganization, but it could see you actually liberating yourself from something that isn't working. Now, one way you could do that, I feel, because Uranus appreciates space, as you all know, it's your co-ruler, is actually create more physical room by getting rid of things that no longer serve your greater good. Now, if you think about creating a minimalist approach, that would be a great way to work with that energy, because it frees you up to actually express what's really important to you, which is ideas. The most idealistic part of your nature is boosted hugely by that unique solar eclipse. Now, ironically, Mercury then returns back into Pisces. You could still find yourself talking about money, a deal of some kind, and it could still be beneficial, but it may require some flexing. And then Neptune steps forward, so combining with Mercury, just like it did at the start of the month, but moves forwards to align with Aries, the position of Aries, for the first time in 163 years. So huge for the next just under 8 months to the 10th of December. And that inspirational part of your nature, because Neptune links back to Pluto at this stage, wonderful stuff. So I feel that if you're someone who has a purpose in life that is beyond the practical realm, you know, whether it is your family, your kids, your interests, your football team, your rugby team, your hockey team, whatever it is that really makes you feel animated, whether it's your political interests, whether it's your community interactions, whether it is to do with a blog you publish, whether it's a business that you have, whatever inspires you can inspire you hugely this month, but it may require you in some ways to rethink some elements of that, but hopefully it is going to sort out something this month that has been a challenge for the last couple of years, which is your finances. But I feel that things can be a little fluid, just bear that in mind. But also, someone or something that has been discussed in the past could be coming back into your realm, and it could come back in a positive way. So we can think about Venus and Mercury retrogrades as being challenging, and they can be, but they can bring opportunities. But that new moon, which cascades into the start of this month, but most of all, I feel the energy that's manifesting in Aries, but linking back to Pluto in your sign, gives you an exciting portent into future possibilities that has proved to be rather elusive over the last few years, of Saturn in your second house, Uranus in the fourth, but most of all for many years, Pluto for the most part being in the very bruising psychological 12th house. If you've yet to check out my new website, please go to www.patrickarundell.com. You can grab yourself my special offer of your combination reports of your life roadmap report, the most important document anyone could ever read. That helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our existence so far, but also your 12 months transit report as well. And there's 30% off. Each of these is totally unique to the person it's produced for. If you don't know your time, you can have my solar option. If you prefer to have whole sign, you can choose that. Or if you'd like to check out your draconic possibilities, your soul chart, you can also get any of those 30% off too. Please see the link below. Welcome Pisces to your March 2025 monthly forecast. If you recall, as February came to a close, there was a new moon in your sign, but it was a new moon that squared off with your traditional ruler of Jupiter. New moons are a great opportunity to showcase our individuality, but to reset how we look. The first house is about our appearance, but the fourth house position of Jupiter is about home and emotion. So maybe some of the things that you're thinking about as you come into this month, as the energy of that new moon provides a backdrop right through March. So it's intriguing that that new moon occurred on the last day of February, but its impact will be felt mostly in March. So something you feel passionate about, but particularly about where you live or your family life, may be something that inspires you the most. And you know, inspiration is a word that really fits the combination of Mercury, Neptune, your modern ruler, but also the North Node back in your sign for the first time since 212, merging with Mercury and Neptune at the start of this month. The North Node, that invisible point, but so powerful in drawing us in a particular direction, also known as the point of destiny, that's saying to you, what is it that you could work with that's very much about you, the individual? Now, it could be by giving yourself a glamorous makeover, but I feel it may be more about expressing a talent, an interest, a creative part of your being. You know, if you are someone who's a gifted musician, an actor, a photographer, a filmmaker, an artist, a crafter, an installer, a potter, whatever you do that really helps you to share what makes you unique, can really glow up at the start of this month in a particularly profound way. The complication, however, is that on the 2nd, Venus in the subsequent sign to yours, which has been giving you the opportunity to have some financial fortune, goes into a retrograde until the middle of April. It's possible, therefore, that if there has been something around your financial situation that hasn't quite been defined, there could be some liabilities. Perhaps Venus in your second house has seen you being a little bit free and easy with your resources, and you may have to tighten up a little bit. Also, it may have seen you struggling to keep to a diet plan that you may have set yourself at the turn of the year with your New Year resolution. But on the 3rd, Mercury steps out of your sign and into Aries, and that supports Venus in a very constructive way. So don't get too caught up on Venus being retrograde at this stage of the month, because Venus also supports Jupiter, your traditional ruler, in a lovely sextile. So despite the retrograde, I actually feel that some good financial news is possible right at the start of this month, and you may get the firm offer or breakthrough by around about the 11th as Mercury and Venus completely combine. But the link between Jupiter happens earlier, and it is very promising. What's not to like? Well, it's just on the 12th, Saturn in your sign for the last couple of years, and you've probably found Saturn quite a challenge, has been in some ways asking you to do the opposite of Venus in your second house. It's been asking you to live your life a little lighter, a little slimmer, a little leaner, a little more aesthetically. It's been asking you to let go of a lot of the fripperies in your situation and just get down to what's truly essential. And you may have found that's what's happened, whether it's been around interests, friendships. Your physical vitality has been lower for the main, and because of that, you've had to prioritize, you've had to decide what's really essential. And the Sun steps forwards to connect with Saturn in an exact way on the 12th in a Saturn cazimi. Now, there is a kind of paradox here, because the Sun in a combination, an exact unison with a planet, the cazimi, usually glows up the other player. But you couldn't really get two more opposite influences, really. The Sun is about manifesting warmth, affection, energy, and Saturn can be about limitation, coldness. If there is part of that plan, that terrific plan that you put in motion at the start of the month, that has some kind of practical weak point, it might show up at this point, unfortunately. Also, the lunar eclipse in your opposite sign, the second between the two signs of Pisces, yourself, and Virgo, recall the first one was in your sign on the 18th of September, that has Saturn opposite the moon. That's pretty challenging. If there is a relationship in your world where someone doesn't get that you need to invest in what makes you unique, that relationship could be severely tested over the next 6 months. But maybe the relationship is with yourself, Pisces, because what the moon in your opposite sign is asking you to do is still stay in contact and relate outwards to people, whatever you're doing that's so important to you. And if you're so caught up, if you're looking inwards to your situation and preoccupied with that, someone else close to you may feel that you're not connected, and they could feel, frankly, cut off, and that could feel uncomfortable for them. So work at your relationships as well as your passions. That's the story of that lunar eclipse. Now, Mercury goes retrograde on the 15th. We know that Mercury retrogrades can cause mischief. For you, the second house is anything to do with daily expenditure. And naturally, it would be a great opportunity to analyse your cost, do a budget, see where you can squeeze a bit more, be a bit more thrifty, but also at the same time be conscious that Mercury can rule online. A lot of people buy online, so anything to do with technology may require a more precise approach. But in week 3 of this month, we see a stunning link between Mars, the planet of passion, in your 5th house of raw romance and self-expression, and Uranus, the planet of surprises, but also the planet of quick change and the need for freedom. And Uranus can see people very outspoken in the 3rd house, as it has been for you 4 times since March 2019. But I think Uranus has also seen you quite stressed at times. But the angle between Mars and Uranus is very conducive for doing something dynamically and quickly that helps you to express that talent that's so important to you. But you can start to get an uptick on the finances despite the 2 retrogrades, because on the 20th, the vernal equinox, the spring equinox, brings in the new astrological year. But this year, it's very close to the reversing Venus. And linking back, both of them, on the 23rd to Pluto in your 12th house. Past effort, sacrifice, and hard work could see you gain some kind of benefit over the following 13 weeks from the 20th. But also Venus returns to your sign on the 27th. That idea, project, strand, divine enthusiasm that you have, maybe if you didn't quite get the money or the recognition or the foundation you wanted first time round, Venus returning to your sign gives you another opportunity to moderate and modify it. Mercury joins up on the 30th. How ironic that we had Mercury in your sign at the start of the month and it ends the month in your sign, suggesting that something that you did put energy into might need to be adjusted, or it might cause innate frustration if you feel that it's not gaining the traction that you wanted. Keep the faith, because remember that week 3 angle between Uranus and Mars is asking to stay decisive, because the 29th solar eclipse, the last in your 2nd solar house of a series that's gone between the 2nd and 8th houses, is very close to your aquatic ruler of Neptune. And therefore, if you are someone with those strands of creativity, imagination, sensitivity, the ability to pull into a situation in a sensory way. Not everyone can do that. You know, Pisces are very gifted in that regard. Yes, you have that other side of your nature that can be almost a reflection of Virgo, a bit cool and a bit detached. But you're being asked, in order to really have the breakthrough that you want, particularly financially, in the 6 months following the solar eclipse, to be in touch with how things feel, to dare to chase your dreams. There's a golden opportunity if you can. Not everything will come off you. Sometimes in life we do have to be very much in the practical sphere, and maybe that's what the lunar eclipse is saying to you. But on the 30th, as Mercury returns to your sign and Neptune steps out of it for just under 8 months, for the first time in 163 years, you're being asked to think again about how you value things. Think again about what your core approach to money, resources are, even what you eat. All of those things are up for review with that solar eclipse at the end of this month. But the big picture really is that the instinctive nature that you have can find an outlet this month, but it needs to find an outlet where it has some kind of earthy practicality to it. So although the Aries energy is fiery, which is about enthusiasm and passion, for you, because it's the second solar house, you need to box things up. So you take something that's an idea, but make it work in a way that has some kind of tangible benefit. So as much as inspiration is important, particularly if you are a very artistic or creative person, do find some applications for the output of your talent that other people can relate to and use, and that will see your financial circumstances start to transform for the longer term, not just this month, for the next half year too. Have a great month, Pisces. If you've yet to check out my new website, please go to www.patrickarundell.com. You can grab yourself my special offer of your combination reports, of your life roadmap report, the most important document anyone could ever read, that helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our existence so far, but also your 12 months transit report as well. And there's 30% off. Each of these is totally unique to the person it's produced for. If you don't know your time, you can have my solar option. If you prefer to have whole sign, you can choose that. Or if you'd like to check out your draconic possibilities, your soul chart, you can also get any of those 30% off too. Please see the link below for more.